Hey everybody, this is Jason Ostrowski, and welcome to another edition of the Everything Real Estate Podcast. Today, we have a special returning guest joining us on the podcast. She is a renowned leadership and innovation coach and a certified Dare to Lead facilitator. Her name is Christine Cavalieri. And in this episode, we are diving into a topic that I personally love to discuss, and that is success killing bad habits for realtors. Chris is here today to share her valuable insights on identifying and overcoming the habits that may be holding you back in your real estate career. We'll also be doing a hands-on exercise with me as our subject, designed to give you some food for thought about your own habits and how you can improve and grow as an agent. Every time we talk to Chris, she always gives me something to think about and motivates me to become a better leader. So let's get right into it with Christine Cavalieri, and we'll pick it up on the other side. So Chris, long time no talk. It's great to have you back on the pod after all this time. I went back and looked. It actually was 2021, the last time that we had you on the podcast. I cannot believe, number one, that I've been doing the podcast that long, but number two, that it's been that long that you and I have actually been together. And I believe that the last time that you were on the podcast, you were psychoanalyzing me to help me find my core beliefs. And apparently it's taken you this long to recover from that experience. But I am so glad to have you back to do it all over again with me. So how are you? It's certainly been a long time.
Oh my gosh, it's so great to see you again. And whatever story you want to write about what our last session was, all I remember is just being in partnership with someone who is just really exploring what's possible.
You and I spoke on the phone a couple days ago, and it was like just getting back in touch with an old friend. And you and I actually checked the call log. I think we were on the phone for about 33 minutes the other day, just talking about completely random topics. But you had me all fired up, and we're going to get into some of that today. Because today we're going to talk about a topic that I genuinely love to discuss. And that topic is success killing bad habits that realtors need to stop doing. And the reason why I love talking about that is because we are all guilty, myself included, of bad habits in our business. And I do think I told you this the other day. I don't think real estate is really that complicated. It's just that we don't do the things that we know that we should be doing. And a lot of that is because we do have bad habits. And in order to talk about this and to show that we're not picking on anyone in particular, today we may pick on me a little bit. All right. So I'm going to be your student today. And we're going to get into some real examples of my own bad habits potentially, in order to help our listeners maybe think about the bad habits that they may have themselves and do that in order to find solutions, because we want to keep it positive. We want to make sure that this is an exercise, and maybe we look into ourselves a little bit. We find some things we can improve upon, and we work to do that. So Chris, I'm going to work in reverse here. Usually I'm the one asking the questions today, but today I think we're going to have you ask some questions yourself, and I'm going to answer some things in order to help our listeners. So does that sound good to you?
Oh, this is my jam. And I also just want to acknowledge that it's super generous of you to do this, because this is what a coaching session looks like. And the only way to kind of understand it is if we see what it's like when someone is really detaching what we call the thinker from the thought. Like sometimes we just do these things habitually without awareness. And we want to bring awareness to how we act, how we lead. And when I say lead, I'm not talking about like organizations necessarily. I'm talking about how we lead our own lives. So we are the CEO of our own organizations. And that just means that a lot of times we have great skills that we use in service of others, but we don't necessarily use them in service of ourselves. So thank you for like really showing up live time. It's a vulnerable thing to kind of explore this and then to share it. But I know how committed you are to growth and potential. And this is just like a behavioral example of this stuff matters to you. So one slight caveat that I want to offer, in case anyone doesn't know the difference of like, what is an executive coach versus, a therapist. So I am hired by organizations to work with their high potential leaders. And when we're exploring these things, it isn't just a job role. It is to how do they lead their whole life. So in this, a lot of times, if you haven't done coaching before, people will say like, "Oh my God, this feels like therapy." Like even you at the beginning of this is like psychoanalysis. It does feel like therapy, but it's not. And I just want to define the difference between the two. So when you're working with a coach, it's very forward focused. Like, what do we want in the future? What do we want more of? It's like, what are we pulled towards? So if you can imagine it, it's very windshield. We're looking through the windshield. Sometimes in designing our lives and figuring out where we want to go, we have to look into the rearview mirror and just get a little orientation of where we come from. So for example, for me, I come from a background of being the oldest child in a family system. My parents were the oldest child. My mom's the oldest of 10, my dad's the oldest of 5. So there's the way that I've walked in this world is pretty habitual. Like I'll show up willing to take responsibility and accountability. Like that was what I learned how to do. Now, if I'm working with my coach, I can say, well, I want to be a little different. So what do I want more of? But I do have to be awareness that I have some old stories about, oh no, Chris, like you have to do it all yourself. Don't ask for help. This old stuff. So my coach is pulling me forward. Now, a therapist would go back and think about where did this come from? Let's fix it. So I often think about, if we're going to use the car metaphor, there are potholes that I will easily fall into simply because of like that, my perception of myself as the oldest, that I have to do it, that I have to have a lot of control. So there's a pothole that I'll fall into. My coach is always saying, we know you might be tempted to do that. How can we avoid it, right? Forward focus. Therapist is, let's go back and fill in the pothole. That was a long-winded explanation.
I think that makes a ton of sense to me, and I think the way you explain it makes perfect sense. And I'm joking when I say that you're sick.
No. Yeah,
that's not what we're here to do. But I do want to mention before you start that this is very real. Like I do not know what you're going to ask me. We did not talk about any of this. So every answer that I give is very genuine. And like you say, we talked about, I'm an open book. I will talk to whoever about pretty much anything outside of probably politics and religion that I keep to myself. But I will say that I'm pretty open about everything else. So I think, I think this all lends itself hopefully to a good podcast episode.
Okay, so then let's make it real. You were talking about what are some habits that might get in the way of success and for others, but let's use it for you. So let's just think about when you're talking about that, something's got to come in mind. What are some of the habits that you might want to adapt, change, pivot because they're getting in the way of what you want?
I think a couple things. Number one is time blocking. And I've mentioned this on the podcast before. I do feel like time blocking is my Achilles heel because I was always poor in terms of organization throughout my life, like always have been. And I have gotten a lot better through the years, but I am by no means, perfect with it. My wife is much more organized than me. And she kind of marvels at the fact that I can get done what I can get done with my lack of organization. So I tend to pinball and ping pong, whatever analogy you want to use, around from task to task. And I often get off task. And so sometimes I feel like I struggle with that, number one. And number two, I think my other issue is I have a bad habit of always saying yes to things. I have trouble saying no a lot. And so I have to be better, I feel like, at a certain point in my life of being able to say no. In fact, I'm listening to a book right now about, not feeling guilty about saying no, because that's where it comes from. I do feel I want to help as many people as possible. And sometimes I should say no when I say yes. So that's a roundabout way of saying two things that I think are bad habits of mine.
Okay. And in your explanation of those two habits that you'd like to adapt, the time blocking and I'm going to say boundaries, because that has to do with saying yes to things. There was a lot of tells that leaked out in your word choice, right? So you said, the first thing you said was, I'm poor in organization. Okay, so maybe organizational stuff isn't your strength. So then let's look at the opposite side of that. The inference that I have is that, but I'm really nimble at pivoting and that I can juggle multiple things at one time, right? So when we hold something in a negative state, like there's something wrong with us, the brain perceives a threat. And the part of the brain that perceives the threat is like, it activates fight or flight. It draws all of the blood to the back of our brain, the amygdala. And that is conditioned response. That is not cognitive decision making. So in that, like, word choice matters because it's keeping all like your focus in the back of your brain. You don't even know it in your word choice. So when we thoughtfully use our word choice, we want to be activating the front part of the brain, which is where all of our intelligence lies. But we can't do that if we're activated by fear. Like, fear and critical thinking don't go together. You get fear and response. Anyway, I won't go too far into that. So the other little pink flag that I heard is always saying yes to things. So is the inference there that, I'm going to put this in quotes, my guess is you might say, what's underneath that, I'm not good at saying no. Does that resonate?
Yeah, it definitely does.
Okay, and so the thing there is you are good at saying no. You say no to yourself all the time.
I had to say, Chris, this I know that my choice of wording, because I know this is what you do and you are very particular with this. I knew that you were going to kind of analyze my wording and throw it back at me. And I was prepared for this, but I know a big thing like you had talked about. Let's talk about our language and use it a little differently. And this is great. This is a great exercise between us, but I knew this was going to happen going into this.
Yeah, and the other thing that you might explore too is you said, I feel guilty saying no. And just because this is the body of work that I'm in, which is exploring, again, word choice, but I do a lot of work based on Brene Brown's research around shame and guilt. And we want to always clarify the two. So guilt is a focus on behavior. It's something that I did. I can feel guilty if I dropped this coffee cup because I did an action. But what you're talking about is probably shame. Shame is a focus on self. So you're saying, I feel guilty saying no. There's no guilt, but like you did do an action. The shame piece is, oh, I feel like I'm not going to be invited to the thing. I won't be liked. It's all this stuff about belonging. So we say guilt, like you didn't do anything wrong, but there's old stories in our head. So before you can even get to habits, you got to understand what are the things that drive the habits, because habits are great. Like they served us. They keep us safe. If you have a habit of working out, well, that's fantastic. But we also have a habit of like avoiding other things. So like avoiding having to get really clear on what matters to me. So I just say yes to everything,
Yeah.
And what's interesting is I would bet in service of everyone else, you could help define what are the guardrails that we're working towards? What's the focus we're putting on? So we already know that you have that skill. It's like, how would we begin to use it for yourself?
Having had this conversation with you and we're like 10 minutes in, like the gears are already grinding in my head. Kind of what is the background to, I guess guilt is the I don't know if that's the right word or the wrong word, but you're making me think about why, and that conversation is already starting in my own head as to why, and it makes me just self-reflective. And I think I had said this last time you and I got together that it's like there's an introspection that takes place as we're talking. And so I'm hearing you talk, and at the same time I'm thinking like, well, why is that? and it makes me question certain things, and it makes me curious. I think the other thing is that when you and I talk, it makes me curious about my own way of thinking, and why that is.
So then let's pull it forward. But I'm going to deliberately avoid using the word why. Because sometimes when we explore why, all we're doing is gathering data and story about what is existing. And instead, let's look at what and how. So there's a reason. Let's look at what are the benefits of you saying yes to all things, of you not having a lot of boundaries? Because there's benefits, otherwise you wouldn't do it.
I look at many things as an opportunity. And I think, and again, I'm not trying to look in the rearview mirror, but I do think that a lot of this stems from, and I think you and I talked about this, I was chronically ill in my life for a very long time. And I think there are things where when I was going through that phase of my life, I missed out on so many things. And I never wanted to kind of waste a minute if I happened to get better. Right. And so I feel like when the opportunity is there to do something, to help somebody, because you and I were talking actually a couple of days ago about making an impact. Right. And that wording that you said to me was very, very eye-opening to me personally, because I think that's where this kind of stems from, is that when I was chronically ill, you felt like you were in a time capsule and you were frozen in time, and everybody else was around you, evolving in their life, whether they were going to college at that time, or, their careers were blossoming, or they were starting to get married and have families, right? I was kind of stuck aside on the sidelines. And so I never wanted to waste a minute if I got better. And also, I wanted to make an impact. I wanted to use my time. There's a Jack London quote that I absolutely love. It's from the last Daniel Craig James Bond movie. Now, that sounds ridiculous, but it is an amazing quote, and I don't have it fully memorized. But basically, it just says that, you don't plan on living forever, but while you're here, you're going to use your time wisely, right? And so it kind of stems back to that point for me. And so I kind of see saying no as a missed opportunity, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. And it goes right back to our first or our last conversation a couple of years ago, when we can get clear on what are the drivers that we have, those core values, the things that we do no matter what. And we talked about, that impact is something that you value, impact / growth. But I also wonder if it's connection too, because what will pull you out of alignment with your commitment to say, oh, I'm going to stay within these boundaries, whatever it is, we have to understand how do I get seduced out of alignment, right? I wonder if, like, your core values around growth and impact is, oh, I can optimize this and it'll be great. It'll be so fun. And it's in a collective way. It's not from a negative way. That's why, I'm pulled towards you when you say this, because it's not, oh my God, something's wrong, we've got to fix it. It's like, oh, what could be even better? And, it's a positive exploration. I'm definitely pulled towards you. But there's another thing that comes up for me. And I wonder if it isn't the reason that the podcast not only exists, but still exists. There's something about connection. When you were describing being home alone during those years you were sick, you didn't have connection. And connection matters a lot to you. So your piece of the podcast is huge connection, on a broader and impact at the same time, right?
I think realtors in general, typically, if you give them a personality a DISC assessment, right? Most of us are promoters. We're, gregarious. We wave our arms when we talk. We're very animated. I find myself not only to be like that, but I genuinely do like talking to people and learning about people. I just like to genuinely have a conversation. I get very positive, and I get energy from talking to other people like yourself, because I am curious by nature. I want to know what you're all about. And in turn, hopefully you want to know what I'm all about, right? And we do have that connection. And I think you're absolutely right. That point in my life was a very lonely place, because not only are you stifled from growth, right? But I did spend the vast majority. I mean, we're talking 5 years, the vast majority of that time by myself. It was incredibly difficult. All my friends were in college, and they would come back and visit me, and they would call me, but at the same time, it's like you're on an island, because you're the only one that is like this. Everybody else is over here, you're over here. And so, I think a lot of that goes into my way of thinking. But it was a very impact. We talk about impact. It had a very large impact on my life and the way I comport myself moving forward.
So, there's a part two. Let's just be a little crass for a moment. When you can clarify what your core values are, like they are who you are, in business organizational stuff, this guy, Jim Cotter, he talks about you can identify the core values of an organization just by looking at the behaviors, but you can also do it with individuals too. So like you could look at either you or I, an outsider, an alien, someone from Mars could say like, oh, I kind of know what they value just by how they walk in the world. Like, obviously we both share a curiosity, right? We're talking, we're curious. But I think too, let me back up a step. When we can identify what those core values are, we can help people to understand us. So if I tell you that I value curiosity and connection, you can see like, oh my gosh, that's why she has the greatest job ever, because she gets to get curious and connect things with people. And I can see why you and I connect, because we have an overalignment. Now, what's helpful is this is where I'm going to get a little crass. Like those are the pillars of my personal brand. And one way to test that you've identified so my core values, curiosity and connection. Yours feel like they might be impact/growth, or I don't, you have to play. It takes a little while to figure them out. But one way to test them is to look back over your career narrative or your life narrative. And are those two things the connective tissue throughout the whole time? So then any marketing that you use, you want to be pulling forward that framework because it's authentic to you. Like it's not manufactured, it's real. Like I'm always going to ask a lot of questions. If you don't know that I value curiosity, you might think, gosh, she's nosy. Well, so, sometimes we have branding
yeah.
But like sometimes we have branding conversations without fully exploring who am I? What is my brand? So not to pull that up into a different conversation, but it does help us because in the habit space, if I understand what my core values are, like yours might be impact, growth, maybe connection, community, something, because there's something about community that keeps coming through. You travel in groups. You've told me that, that you guys, so it keeps showing up. You're like, ding, ding, ding. Now that may not be 100% it. You'll find the words. So then you can say, whenever I have to do something hard, like try a new behavior, how can I do these things that already serve me to help me keep showing up for myself?
Well, you know what? I also think, just from a personal standpoint, that I like to explore. I'm an explorer in terms of not only like travel, right? Like I like to go to different places and explore the local scene, explore the local culture, go to the local, restaurants, whatever. I like to explore that stuff in the same way that I like to explore in my own life, whether it be reading a new book or we talk about growth, right? I like to explore a different angle about something. Having this conversation is me exploring kind of like myself, right? I really get into that. I really enjoy that part of life. And, I wanted actually speaking of exploring, I wanted to ask you a question because we talk about, this episode about habits and improvement. Would you say that it's what is easier in your mind? Learning consistent good habits or ending consistently bad habits?
So I would lean more towards learning, because ending, we hold in a negative concept. There's something wrong and I've got to stop it. So every day that I don't stop it, I feel like I failed. As opposed to every day, if I set this small, it's a great book on habits by James Clear. It's called Atomic Habits.
Habits, love it. One
right?
of my favorite books.
But he talks about baby steps, or in some other work, they call it TNT, the tiny next thing. Now, here's the thing with a baby step. In our mind, like when you start to do this new thing to learn, there's two things. One, adults don't like to be beginners. We are very comfortable with being competent at things. So we're like, oh, I read the book, do the thing. That's unrealistic expectations. And it's kind of like, I'll go to the mall, buy the running shoes, come home and run the marathon. Like, no, that's not possible. And we have to be, doing these tiny next things, that TNT or the baby step, but to recognize that when I'm going to do a baby step towards a new behavior, a baby step in our mind, we hold as small. We think, oh, it's a tiny action, but really a baby step. Think of how a baby learns to walk. It is clumsy. It's a hot mess. There's a lot of falling. And oftentimes there's no forward movement. You might in a baby step fall backwards, but you just recognize like that's part of it, as part of the human experience, and we're learning. But as adults, we become really comfortable with being knowers and being beginners. I have not started pickleball because I don't want to look like, and I know I would like it, but it's the beginning piece I don't want to do, So all these little things, we just have to see what serves me better, to look at it from a pull place, I'm pulled towards this, or a push place, I don't want this. Positive premise.
I find it hilarious that you bring up pickleball, because we have started to play pickleball the past probably about year and a half, and learning the new rules and everything. I think that does discourage some people from actually doing it, right? But we love it. My wife loves pickleball. I mean, she is all about pickleball. But in the same vein, I tried to get her into golf a couple years ago, and she's going to probably be mad at me for saying this, but I'm going to say it. She does not like not being good at something. Like you talked about, and I tell her, you can't just hop into the game of golf and just be good at it. Like, it's a very challenging thing to be good right away. And so she kind of put it on the back burner. Now she hasn't played for a while because she gets frustrated that she's not immediately good. I feel like I constantly tell myself, and I think this is, good for the listeners, is that I think one way to explore something is to tell yourself that everybody started at the same point. And that's what I always tell myself. When I started doing this podcast, even when I go back and listen to our previous time together, right, 3 years ago, I can tell that there is a difference between me now and me back then. I can tell by the modulation of my voice, because I sound very monotone and crisp and blah, blah, blah. And I learned that I have to modulate my voice to have some energy when you're actually hosting a podcast, right? So I do think you have to remind yourself that you're not going to be instantly great at a lot of things, and it takes time to get there. And don't worry about it. We've all been there before, right? So, I'm sure you want to add to that.
Only because it just keeps showing up. And, like when you're pregnant, all you see are pregnant people. Maybe that's just, I noticed it. So right now in my personal growth journey, just really exploring perfection versus healthy striving. And if you know me, you would think, oh, she's not a perfectionist. Like, I love to do things loosey-goosey, pivot, change, be nimble, not unlike yourself. And let things reveal themselves. I don't want to try and control a workshop or an experience. Let's let it reveal, leave a little space for some grace. So the perception is, oh yeah, I can see she's not a perfectionist. I didn't think I was a perfectionist, but I am. I'm a perfectionist of myself. And the difference between perfectionism and healthy striving is perfection is a focus. It's externally motivated. I want you to see me as perfect. Whereas healthy striving is, I just want to know, am I growing? Am I learning? That's internally motivated. We tend to spend more time focusing on the perfection piece because it can be observed. So in this, if I can say, oh, you know what? I'm healthy striding. The fact that I fell and I'm getting back up. I made that call and they said no. And I made the call. Like I picked up the phone and made the call. Like to just see a year ago, would I have been as comfortable making that call or having that hard conversation with the buyer about, or the seller, notice the growth steps. But what we tend to do is not notice the growth, but how far we are off of perfect. And that, again, perfection is externally will always feel worse. It takes more energy to work towards perfection than to say, oh, I am a grower, I'm a learner. And look at me, look how far I've come. You just did it. You literally just did it.
In order for me to grow, I feel like I need to know that about myself, that we aren't perfect. And so I think a lot of this goes, if I can like use this in a real estate analogy. So many agents are so fearful about doing video on social media, right? Even though they know they should be doing it, they find a reason not to because they see themselves as so imperfect when they do video that they don't even get started doing it. And it becomes this death spiral way of thinking where like, well, how are you going to get better at it if you expect perfection every time out? And it takes practice to get better at actually doing video, right? So you get in this twisted pretzel like position about, so you don't even start, right? And I just feel like that's a shame because we could all be doing more in our business because we need to do more of that nowadays.
And an invitation is, courage is contagious. It's a Brene Brown quote. But if I'm an agent and you see anybody else in your office post something on video, tell them, reward the vulnerability. Say, even if you just press a like, even if you just view it, do something. Because honestly, it is brave to put yourself out there. And we begin to align to say like, wow, we're doing this. Collectively, we're going to do this thing. It's tough to be on video, but we get fully seen like that. People are bringing us into their homes, exposing all of their stuff, and we don't want to be seen on camera. Like that feels a little out of alignment. And I get it, but I think, it's a longer conversation about the video piece. But the perfection piece is to say, do I want to show up as someone who's growing and learning? So let's pull it all back to the habits piece. When the temptation is to say, like, I'm going to go and start doing this new thing. I'm going to add this new task on because I want to change, my success habits. I would say before you even add on a new task, what can you let go of and stop doing to leave some space for something new? Whenever we learn something new, it is more exhausting for our brain and bodies. We have to think harder. Listen, stuff I know, I don't even think about. Think about driving a car, right? It's more tiring if I have to pay attention. So what can you mentally, physically, emotionally let go of to leave a little space for this new thing, this tiny next thing? And maybe the baby step is just letting go of something.
I think that's a great point. I think about, stuff that I can let go of because you talk about a perfectionist. There are certain things in my life where I resonate with you about this too, because you talk about being the oldest. I am the oldest, and I've gotten better through the years, but I'm not perfect with letting simple tasks be done by other people. Meaning if I have to put together a mailer, right, just to farm an area real estate wise, I'm still doing that. And I think to myself, why am I doing this? I can easily pay someone to do this, a few bucks, and it will get done. And I shouldn't have to worry about this. But I just find myself, I'm so used to being like, I'll just do it and get it done. Like I don't even think about it. I'm just like, I'll just do it. I'll get it done. That way I know it'll get done. It'll get done right. But I've learned at this point in my life that is not the best use of my time, especially for someone that's busy. And so I'm getting better at that. But that right away, that resonates with me, Chris, is like, what can I get rid of? I can get rid of that stuff easily. And I think a lot of us can. And I think that speaks to a lot of people listening right now, it's like you can get rid of all that stuff and move on to something better.
And to also think that every moment that I'm spending an hour doing a mailer that I could outsource for $50 to $100 an hour is an hour I can't sell at my highest top rate. So get back to the time blocking. If you ever had to really account for your time and what did you really earn per hour?
Yeah.
If you're always going to be working at that low rate, that you could outsource mailing, then you're limiting your income potential.
Yeah, it's completely silly. I mean, yeah. When you break it down like that, it's like, what am I doing? I mean, I think about what I could be doing in that hour, whether it is taking some personal time, whether it's learning something new, whether, let's say, it's taking my wife on a date, like she'll like that one. But it is doing something that's more beneficial to myself than to being bogged down with minutia that can easily be outsourced,
And all of this takes awareness. So I'm going to say sometimes you don't stop doing something to start doing something else. Sometimes you stop doing something to get still.
Yes.
That could be replenishment. That could be clarity. So like, okay, stop. Now let's refine what really matters. The challenge is it's hard to do it for ourselves. We can do it for others. So that's why having colleagues in this work, that's why walking lunches, that's why anytime we get in community and talk about this work together, we do support one another. Because otherwise we'll stay in our heads. Now think about when we talk to ourselves in our heads, there's no grammar. It's just like a spiral negative. Like once I start to tell the story, it just goes down. That's why, really journaling helps. If you have to journal, you have to put some grammar in, but also just talking to a friend, talking to someone else and saying, this is my strategy for this week. You could even talk to your dog. You put grammar in sentences to your dog or cat, but in your internal monologue, you're like, no, and then you should do this, and then you should do this, and then you should do this. And it just perpetuates the habit. So it's just kind of like, hold on, let's get clear. What's one tiny next thing I want to do that leads my organization, me, from a place of strategy instead of reactivity?
I also want to ask you, because going back to Atomic Habits, do you agree? You talk about baby steps with some of these things. Mm-hmm. Do you find as a coach that is the best way to make consistently good habits? Because I know personally, just like, I think a diet is the best example here, or going to a gym. It's easy to do it for a little while. But then people often give up or they revert back to a mean, and some of those may not be beneficial for them. So how do we build good habits and sustain good habits consistently? How do you feel like the best way to approach that is if we want to make a change? How do we go about doing that?
Well, that's where I think you got to figure out what matters to you, because it's got to be a pull. What is a pull for me may not be a pull for you. So what I learned in working with a personal trainer at a gym is, listen, nobody loves to get up and go. Afterwards, I'm always glad. It's kind of like going to yoga. I love it after, but that in. But one of the things I realize is, I like the connection, the community. When I'm coaching, I do it virtually. When I'm facilitating, I'm in person. But I love the human touch. I love the energy that an extrovert gets when they interact. So I will go and be like, oh my God, I can't wait to go and see that person and say hi. So I've got to put a pull on it. That's mine. Yours might be different. But you've got to think, how can I delight it? Another example, switching to... some folks are switching to Kindles more, going back to the Kindle so that we're not looking at phones at night, right? So that to break the habit, that scrolling on the phone habit, the blue light that keeps us up longer, impairs our sleep, it is designed to suck us in. It gets the dopamine hit all the time. So to switch to a Kindle, to do a Paperwhite that's backlit, you're not going to get blue light. You might have sleep better. You've got to pick a book that you really want to read, not like a heavy duty, hard, you'll lose yourself in. So what is the delight that helps that new habit be better? It's don't think of it as the reward. It's like, I want more of this. What do you want more of? and build it behind the new muscle. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense.
Actually, in James Clear's book, he talks about, like, if you're going to join a gym, the first week, just drive to it. Don't even go in. And I thought that's a huge point, right? Just build the muscle of getting up and getting in the car. And then to not be allowed to go in, like, I'm ready now. Okay, well, I got this. Let's go.
Yeah, everybody wants to, or I shouldn't say everybody, but many people want to jump in head first, right? And I'm gonna transform my body overnight in a gym.
Yeah.
And that's not how things work. And I agree with you. James Clear, I think, makes it abundantly clear that you need to take these small bite-sized portions, like you said, building that muscle. And it takes time and consistency, but do it in an easy fashion to start, something that's easily accomplished, and then move on from there. And so I think many of us want to bite off more than we can chew at first. I know I'm that way, but I am learning to be better, with that as well. What would you say? We're getting kind of near the end of our time here, but I want to get your take on, what do you feel like, as a coach, you consistently see the most of in terms of bad habits, particularly with real estate agents, because you've been there, you've been in the real estate world before. What do you come across a lot, I guess, is my question. And how do you potentially break those bad habits? You talk about going back to core beliefs. Is it as simple as starting with that, no matter what the bad habit is, like starting with the core beliefs and moving on from there?
Yeah, that's kind of hard to do by yourself, not impossible. But I would say the other thing too is to not care as much, right? And the example that I use a lot of imagery in my coaching. It's from the leadership metaphor about the balcony and the dance floor. So when I'm on the dance floor, I'm executing. I just do the thing. I'm going about through my life, and it's the actual execution part of how we do what we do. And then sometimes we need to get on the balcony and look over at ourselves on our own dance floor and be like, oh, there's Chris. Because it's only when I'm on the balcony that I can see, oh, she has her back to this. Or she's not even noticing that the band is, getting ready to leave, because it's this dance hall metaphor. And so we have to get some distance to be able to look at ourselves. And when I'm on the dance floor, I care a lot. I'm like enmeshed. I'm in the thing. And so getting to the balcony is like getting that distance so that I can use my objectivity and say, oh, what is Chris trying to do? But when you're in it, you can't see the full landscape. You can't see what's going on. You only see that person in front of you. Oh my God, that call didn't work. Or I didn't get that listing, or whatever the thing is. Now, when we're in the dance floor, it feels like we're doing all the things. I'm doing it. But you might just keep doing the most familiar things. We've confused activity with prosperity. Like, what's the wise thing and what's the familiar thing? So if I self-identify as a hard worker who never stops, it is very difficult for me to get strategic about how I run my own organization, because I've self-identified as, oh, I'm available 24/7 to all my people. Well, hold on. If I can make that separate from Chris is this person who does this job, but it isn't like, I'm extrapolating way too many metaphors in a rush to get this down here.
That's all right.
I care too much when I'm on the dance floor. Like, if I'm making that call, oh, they don't like me. No, it's not me. I am just a realtor. That's one part of my job. And now if I can get some distance and see, oh, look at me. I'm getting a little too caught up in job. I'm dancing with job. I'm not really dancing with family. I'm not really dancing with rest. But when we care a lot, when we get scarcity minded, we just want to stay here. I'll just dance harder and it'll work. And in most of the organizations I'm coaching is, you are part of a bigger system. You're part of something big. You don't know what's going on in that buyer or seller's minds. You only know what they tell you. There are other things. It's not about you. So don't care as much about how does it feel. It's really not you. It's the role that you bring. So care less, honestly.
Yeah, it's almost like, again, we talk about metaphors and analogies, but it's almost like taking a 36,000-foot view of yourself,
Yes.
almost like an
Yes.
out of body. You're looking down onto yourself. So I'm going to end with this. And usually I end with an offbeat kind of question. But I want to know, because you do this day in, day out, you deal with people all the time. I know personally in my business what the hardest personality type that I have to deal with. What is the hardest personality type for you to coach, and why is that for you?
What a great question. Well, also, coaching clients choose me. So, the chemistry. But I would say, so I'm not forced to coach anyone, and it's all developmental. But I would say the hardest thing is someone who just wants to get better at their job. Because that's not in service of self. Who we are is how we lead, right? So I've got to lead myself first. And I can't lead my real estate organization in an impaired way if I'm not taking care of me. And so they'll just say, I just want to get more things. They just want to coach to the problem. No, there's something behind that. There's something bigger. That's like coaching to firefighting. Not helpful. That's, again, coaching to dance floor instead of, no, we're going to get on the balcony. Let's stay on the balcony. Let's look up and see what's possible, what might get in the way. Because whenever a coach works with somebody, you're the expert on you. I don't know you. All I'm trying to do is to say, hey, what's possible? But when we're by ourselves, we tend to think, I have no choice. I have no power. We're just kind of stuck. When you get up on the balcony, you're like, hold on. Oh, wait a minute. Here's a possibility. Now, I'm going to give you a question. It's an icebreaker question I use sometimes, but it's also, it's a hard question to ask because it forces self-inquiry. And you know what? Nobody cares about the answer. The exercise of thinking about what you might say is the benefit. So the question is, what's something you pretend not to know?
Wow.
And in your context, it could be, what's something you pretend not to know about why time blocking is hard, or why shifting my habits is difficult.
What I pretend not to know about time blocking or shifting my habits. Sometimes I feel like I pretend not to know what benefits will be there for me if I time block correctly. Like, it's like willful ignorance, right? That I very well know that I need my calendar and my schedule, and yet I will not pay attention to it, almost purposefully, because I don't know if laziness would be the right word. I guess I'm so used to doing things the way that I do them, that shifting that way of doing things, not that it's difficult, but it's a change that I don't feel like I have time for. Does that make sense?
Yes. And I would say, just because we're coming to the end, what you might explore too is, do I feel trapped? Do I feel like I don't have choice and control? Oh, this is the block. I'm supposed to do this thing, but a call comes through. So, I mean, you could do it, but if you roll into it more lightly, like, oh, this is the general time block, but I give myself permission to pivot, I think you were saying benefits, but I think it's the cost too. Like, there's a cost.
Yeah, there is. And I think the other thing is, like, well, I've been successful to a point doing it the way that I'm doing it. Right. And so I don't need to do that a better way. I mean, even though I know it's a better way, I mean, it's almost like ridiculous, but that's kind of my rationale, is that I'm getting by. I'm fine, And I think, if I explored that further, there's probably 1,000 more things that I could uncover about myself.
Oh my God. We could talk about this. Well, because it just keeps pulling forward.
That's the thing, Chris. I feel like literally when we get together, like we're already at probably like 50 minutes right now. Oh, wow. I could talk to you and I say this in all sincerity, I could talk to you for hours on end and it would feel like we're having like a 20-minute conversation because you pull things out of me that make me think and I just want more. It's like I just want to hear Chris more. Like, ask me another question. Like, keep coming at me. I love this, But you and I do have to cut it off at some point. So yes. before we get out of here, I just want our listeners to know more about you. Where can they find you if they, potentially want to get in touch with you, if they want to follow you, if they want to look further into your services, where can they find you?
So my website is workwhilelife.com. I'll send a resource if you have anything on your page. I would also encourage folks to attend. Most of my work is internal. I'm hired by companies to come in. I do have public offerings, and there are 3 more this year. They're called Dare to Lead, and I highly, highly recommend them to entrepreneurs. And isn't that what realtors are?
Absolutely. Yeah. And your work with Brene Brown, obviously I want to, I just want to make sure that I mention that name because a lot of people know that name. And I know my wife is a big fan. So Chris, I'm sure we'll be doing this again at some point. And 3 years from now, maybe we'll have another, another session together and I'll have a lot more skeletons in my closet to break out. But I truly appreciate you. I love talking to you and thank you for doing this.
Oh, me too, you. Thanks so much, Jason. I appreciate the invite. Take care.
You got it. Take care. That was the conversation with Chris Cavalieri. I really enjoyed talking to Chris, and here are a couple of takeaways. I'm not going to go very long in this section because our interview this week did go on the longer side, but here's my takeaway. I think the first thing in talking to Chris, and I've done this multiple times now, is that she makes you sit back and take account of yourself. And you have to come from a place of honesty first. If we're talking about bad habits and trying to break them and improve yourself and your business, the first thing starts with being honest with yourself. If you have bad habits that need to be addressed, you can't deny them. You have to sit back, take account of who you are, and know your strengths and weaknesses. So the first thing you need to do is to be honest and have some introspection in order to move forward with better habits, better business practices, better production. The second thing that I'd like to talk about is what motivates you to change a bad habit. And that speaks to what Chris calls the pillars of your brand, right? And who you are as an individual. What motivates you? What do you truly get up in the morning for? What kind of gets that fire going in your belly in order to produce at a high level? And I think that's the next step you need to take. Okay, if first we have to be honest with ourselves, then what is going to motivate you to make a big change in your life and keep that consistent? Because it's easy to start something and then to quickly revert back to what we used to do. So what is it that motivates you? What is at your core that is going to drive you to make that change? You have to figure that out for yourself. The last thing I'll say is that Chris always comes from a place of positivity, and I think that's why I enjoy talking to her so much. If you have a bad habit, don't beat yourself up over it. Stay positive, and just remember, in order to build good habits, Chris talks about taking those baby steps. You start small and build and build and build. That's the way to make a lasting change in your life that will have longevity. Well, that's it for the podcast this week. We will be back in another couple of weeks with a new topic, a new guest. And as always, if you'd like to hear something that we haven't covered yet, please reach out to me at jason.ostrowski@foxroach.com. And if you haven't liked and subscribed to the podcast yet or left us a review, please do so. It helps us to reach more people. Once again, this is Jason Ostrowski saying stay safe out there, stay selling, and we'll catch you on the next episode of the Everything Real Estate Podcast.